Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the webinar. Before we begin, allow me to share a few formalities. All the participants are in a listen-only mode. We invite you to type your questions to the panelists in the question and answer chat function, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. Your questions will be private and can only be viewed by the hosts and the panelists. Later on in the discussion, I will open it up to questions. So today's webinar is an exclusive media preview to the AVPN Virtual Conference 2020, the largest gathering of the social investment community in Asia. For the first time ever, AVPN is taking the convening fully online, and it will take place through a series of live sessions starting next week from the 8th to the 12th of June. We already have more than 4,500 delegates from more than 63 countries who have signed up to join us in this virtual convening. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome our media friends to join us at the conference. More details will be shared with you via email after today's webinar. So housekeeping announcements over. A very warm welcome to everybody, and thank you for joining us. Just to introduce myself, I am Naina Batra, Chairperson and CEO of AVPN, and it is my pleasure to moderate today's panel discussion, Social Investing, Let's Talk Challenges, Capital and COVID-19. We have an exciting lineup of speakers whom I will introduce to you in just a moment. But before I introduce our speakers, let me take a second to introduce AVPN to you. AVPN is a unique funders network with more than 600 members from 34 markets. We are headquartered in Singapore, and our core mission is to increase the flow of financial, human, and intellectual capital to the social sector. In today's panel discussion, I am joined by three distinguished members of the unique AVPN ecosystem who are here to explore the brave new world of social investments and community impact during COVID-19 and beyond. Our discussion this afternoon will touch on what are top social investors doing now to address our most urgent community needs. How can companies navigate the new government priorities and funding streams to stay relevant and resilient? And how will partnerships be formed during the COVID-19 crisis, which will shape a new normal of philanthropy and CSR going forward? With that, I would like to introduce our distinguished panelists who will answer these questions and more this afternoon. First, we have Robin Hu. Robin is the head of the Sustainability and Stewardship Group at Temasek International. Welcome, Robin. Next, we have Dipali Khanna. Dipali is the Managing Director of the Asia Regional Office at the Rockefeller Foundation. Thanks for joining us, Dipali. And finally, we have Tony Young. Tony is the CEO of Peterson Holdings Company Limited, a family-owned private entrepreneurial company based in Hong Kong. Tony is also a director of AVPN. Thank you so much, Tony, for joining us. Let me now turn it over to our panelists to briefly introduce themselves and their organization's response to COVID-19. I'll start with you, Robin.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Naina. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the people out there listening in. My apologies that I will have to leave this particular meeting 10 minutes to 3 o'clock. But let me just start by maybe introducing a little bit what Temasek, what we are doing at a time such as this. Now, Temasek, we all know, is a intergenerational investor, but we are also, very importantly, a responsible steward. So in the stewardship role of Temasek, we take our responsibility towards our community very seriously. So in February this year, Temasek set up the T-Pride Fund, that stands for Temasek Public Resilience Infectious Disease Emergency Fund, to support our communities in Singapore as well as in the region. Now, the fund is designed to galvanize 4 types of intervention needs that we face in our societies. Number one will be diagnosis, which is essentially to help address the demand for COVID-19 testing, which is turning to be even more intensive than we had experienced maybe some months back. Secondly, it is about containment, which is designed to preventing community spread. As we know, that is exceedingly important. Third would be in the area of treatment. In other words, we would like to fill the gaps in particular treatment, and therefore understanding, investing, experimenting, piloting new ways of therapies and treatment for COVID-19. And of course, in the fourth area, that will be an area of protection prevention, which is to secure sufficient supplies of sanitizers and personal protective equipment, which all know are very short in supply, particularly when at the outset of this breakout. Now, I will also mention that there are four particular constituents that we target our various programs with the intention of helping. These are frontline workers in the healthcare industry, of course, and they are very vulnerable and they are very critical. And we rely on them to actually keep COVID-19 under containment. The elderly, which is very vulnerable, as we all know, the migrant workers, particularly here in Singapore, in the area that we would like to make sure that we give them the care packs necessary consumables, particularly for those that are not living in purpose-built dormitories, preschools, as well as larger community as a whole. So the long and short of the story is that Temasek is implementing a number of programs across the various different constituents here in Singapore in the various facades of protection, containment, and fighting. And we would like to take this opportunity to also call upon the corporate world, as well as the world of philanthropy, to join us in the joy of giving. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. And it's really impressive what Temasek has done since the crisis began. Dipali, can I turn to you now to just give us a brief introduction about how the RF group is dealing with the crisis?
Thank you, Naina. And it's such a privilege to join you as well as Robin and Tony in this conversation today. So just a little bit of brief history about Rockefeller Foundation. We just celebrated our 107th anniversary, and our mission has always been to serve the well-being of humanity. We work with partners so that we can really strive towards catalyzing and scaling transformative innovation. We create unlikely partnerships across different sectors. And most importantly, we are able to take risks where others can't, because we really use our resources as high-risk capital, being a philanthropic foundation. In terms of our enduring partnership in Asia, that is really reflected through the partnerships we've been able to build over the years with government, philanthropies, and the social sector. Through the 100 years, our journey in Asia particularly has been really exciting, because we started off by setting up public health institutions such as the Peking Union Medical College and Hospital in China, as well as the Sri Raj Hospital in Thailand. We did quite a bit of work around capacity building. And of course, for those of you who know, in India, we also led the whole Green Revolution. Our work most recently has been centered around how do we end energy poverty? And I think what we're really trying to do through that is to really enable energy access to drive economic development. We've also been focusing on how do we save lives through preventable deaths, that mothers and young children have to face. And we've made a bold commitment of saving 6 million lives. We've also been doing a lot of work across 20 cities in Asia Pacific, where we really have tried to build resilient cities. And most importantly, we've been trying to use the power of data and technology to really drive social impact. So, with, of course, COVID-19, we've seen how it struck us in catastrophic proportions across Asia. And we're really trying to see how we can meet the moment. And the first thing that we did was to revisit our goal, strategy, and approach and see how we could be much more agile to really respond to what the moment really needed of us. So our whole approach right now is meeting the moment. I think what COVID-19 has really shown us is the work that we've been doing becomes even more important. So when we look at the ending energy poverty, the renewable energy that we've been providing to villages, to health infrastructures, whether it's getting the ventilators up and running, energy is such an essential service. And, through our work that we've been doing, we've been able to provide that 24/7 with quality, which is really important, and we need to do more of that. The work that we've done around precision public health, saving mothers and children's lives, has shown us the need for a stronger public health system. So, that work continues to really become front and center. Similarly, we've seen how urban centers, have not been able to really respond to the crisis. And need to do much more around our resilient cities work. So I think we're continuing to beef up our existing work, but most importantly, we've also made a commitment of $50 million over the next 2 years to do 3 things. The first is we really want to be doing a lot more in beefing up testing capabilities across the globe. I'm sure you must have been reading what we've been doing in the US and also in Africa, and we're launching something in India pretty soon around really working with the government and the ecosystem actors to see how we can be part of the journey of producing more testing kits within India. So that's the first piece. The second important piece for us is really how do we respond to the food crisis and how do we make our food systems much more resilient? So, we know in children in the US, in Africa, don't have enough food. The schools have closed down, the school feeding programs are shut down. So we are really responding to that, as well as, really seeing how we can get the markets opened up in places like Africa, because I think, that is really going to be important from not just an immediate response but from the midterm and long-term perspective. The third important piece of work is around livelihoods and how do we protect livelihoods. So in Asia, we're really working with other donors to see how we can be working in the MSME sector to really be able to provide access to credit. So I think, in all that we are trying to do, we're really seeing we're seeing how we can work much more flexibly with our existing partners, as well as how do we build collaborations with other actors, because meeting the moment right now is so critical, and we are trying to do everything that we can to really be seeding the foundations for stronger health systems going forward, because all of us knew that a pandemic was definitely on the cards, but we together really didn't respond to it. So we're really hoping that we all can take this moment to really be working together much more effectively, so that we are much better prepared to deal with the current pandemic, but also with future pandemics. Thank you, Naina.
Thank you so much, Dipali. Thank you. And really shows what a role philanthropy has to play in our times and in our communities. Tony, over to you, just to tell us a little bit about yourself and the Peterson Group, please.
Well, the Peterson Group is a private family office that we are headquartered in Hong Kong, but we have a long history in North America and recent in Europe as well. I am the third generation of my family, and we have always believed that it's important to give back to society. During the pandemic, I could say that we basically have 3 areas we focused on. Initially in January, February, that's when China first outbreak. China was building a temporary hospital in 10 days, and actually 2 temporary hospitals. And that required a lot of funding, which through one of our healthcare partners in China, we were able to support both financially and also buying ventilators and PPE through our partners in China, sourcing from outside Europe and other places at that time. So that was the initial stage where we found was most pressing needs. Then came stage 2, where Hong Kong was at risk as well. And what we found was that the government had a lot of challenges in buying PPE, masks, and so forth. And so, being entrepreneurial and having less restrictions, we as a private sector, we were able to acquire some masks to provide for several parties. One for local NGOs and low income, and we distribute those masks through our local partners, the different NGOs that we have worked with. 2, we try to source some masks for the hospitals, because back then Hong Kong hospitals had only about 2 weeks left of inventory supply, and they were ran out. And it was a very rare resource, because the government, in terms of how they had acquisition, they had a lot of handcuffs to it. And being from the private sector, we could have put down deposits and help government recruit, buy some of those PPE equipment as we go along. And then the next wave came in places like Canada and other places, where in those governments, when Hong Kong, the mask inventory started building up back in Asia, the North America and other parts of the world started asking masks. So we helped source some of the masks from China back to some of the North American operations, which has helped us earlier in the process. So being private sector, bridging those gaps in trying to source and be more entrepreneurial how we distribute these things, that's the second area we focused on. The third area, obviously through COVID, there has been a lot of unemployment And what we did in our, even some of our business, we got hit. And so we created some temporary positions where we allocate the staffing to other parts of the business, such as, for example, some of the warehouses needs to be refiled and restructured. This is something that we didn't really have to do, but in order to help a lot of the unemployed get through COVID, this is something we create some position, not a lot, but we did a little bit to help some people get through this. And lastly, in Hong Kong in particular, there was a lot of social enterprise which were long history but was suffering. All the trainings, a lot of the funding, everything got canceled. And so we provide some bridging facilities for some of these to help them withstand COVID. And hopefully, through as the economy gets back on track, they will be able to continue their good making. And being in a private company, being an entrepreneur, we were like the Rockefeller, we were able to give out those funding needs in a much more efficient manner and with less handcuffs to it.
Thank you, Tony. It's really actually been quite interesting, even from your introductory statements from all of you, to really see how corporates, philanthropic organizations, and even smaller family offices have been able to respond to the humanitarian crisis that COVID-19 has placed in front of us. So, Robin, let me ask you a follow-up question. So we know that developing countries at this point face an average annual funding gap of more than 2.5 trillion US dollars at the current levels of public and private investment. Given that there is an economic crisis around the corner, which every government is trying to figure out how they're going to meet it, and Singapore has announced a lot of measures. What are the implications, in your view, for achieving the SDGs by 2030?
Well, thank you, Naina, for that question, which is a very meaningful one. I think even without COVID, I think it's probably conceivable to say that just like climate crisis, that come 2030, the collective goals of the SDGs are unlikely to be met. But having said that, it's not all doom and gloom, because in every thunder we can see some silver lining. So let me try to attempt to maybe say a little bit of what I think might be the silver lining out of all this, particularly from a corporate and corporate governance point of view. I think, first of all, I think corporate responsibility have never seen as much conviction and showering of activities and blessings from the corporate world. I've never seen it anything like this in the past, and I think we have got quite a few great examples that has been shared already. So I think the state of consciousness of corporate responsibility towards our community, towards our nation, towards our region, have really taken on a very heightened sense of attention. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing, as a result of that you're beginning to see that culturally, that the corporate cultures are likely to move more towards social consciousness. In other words, that the concept of triple bottom line, whether it's people, profit, and planet, that never really used to be the central piece of any corporate power corridor in the boardroom conversations, and will begin, I think, to have an opportunity to get greater reception in the right places among the business leaders. And I think that's going to be a very important, and beginning to see a possible shift from a profit supremacy to that of a more balanced triple bottom line type of approach. And the second thing, thirdly, just like climate crisis, and that never used to appear in corporate risk management construct, that maybe until 5 years ago, I'd never really been to any particular boardroom meetings where climate change was actually part and parcel of the fundamental risk profile of any company that we will face. Today it is. Likewise, I think the fiduciary duty of social consciousness would also become, I think, a centerpiece of the conversation. So I see that particular thrust happening in the corporate world. But I think I will also say that apart from the healthcare industry, apart from the food industry, that we can see very direct implication that arising from social investing will continue to be the trend. I would also like to say here that COVID whether we like it or not, will make winners and losers for clusters going forward, right? So some of the clusters that used to be great winners in the past, maybe post-COVID, not so great. Maybe some of the clusters in the past didn't really quite get the attention. Post-COVID, I think maybe we should take another look again. So for example, anything to do with consumers that has to do with food, for example, whether it's food supply, food security, food production, food waste, securing of food because, you have to secure the supply. Businesses of that nature in consumer sector, I think you are going to see something that's going up. The tech sector, again, has been one of the chief beneficiary of COVID because e-commerce, as you can see, is going to take on a much greater set of importance than we have ever seen before. So that the tech sector are going to just aggregate more eyeballs, are going to create more and more support and more trust into the particular sector. So I think that's the second sector that you can see a clear winner out of COVID. And the third one, I would say would be the healthcare sector. That's a no-brainer, right? So anything to do with life sciences, pharmaceuticals, therapies, drugs, vaccines, and so on. So all that would be. So as a result of all that, you will see the winners of those sectors. I think they will have the greater responsibility to put a portion of their profit into doing good, and they are in the position to take initiative to activate social investing in the field that will be directly to the core of their future sustainable success.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. I think that is absolutely where we need to start looking, and I'm so glad that you're looking at this in a more forward way and in a more sort of positive light rather than looking at more doom and gloom. So moving on a more positive light as well, I'd love to hear from you, Dipali. You talked a little bit in the introduction about how the Rockefeller Foundation has supported communities on the ground with both their healthcare as well as their energy poverty needs. I'd like to understand from you, how do you see these needs changing on the ground? And just tell us a little bit more in detail how the foundation is planning to respond over the next sort of 18 to 24 months.
Thanks, Nena. I think, of course, we are seeing a lot of new developments on the ground as a result of COVID-19, but also what we are seeing is the gaps in the existing systems, which have just come into the limelight. We've known that our community health systems haven't been effective. The community health networks, have been weak. So I think, the pandemic has definitely exposed this, and we continue to work with our partners in India, for example, with UNICEF and Piramal Foundation, to really see how we continue to provide the support which is needed on the maternal and child safety side of things, because as we're responding to COVID-19, pre-postnatal care, immunizations, etc., have all been put to a halt. So, as we're kind of getting the messaging around COVID-19 and really ensuring that the communities are well protected, but how do you continue with the regular services has been an important issue that we are really trying to kind of work very closely and see that that reaches the communities. On the energy side, again, what we've seen is the consumption rates have come down by 46%. So even though, we've been working across private sector companies to really provide renewable energy across 250 villages, we felt that, this was such an essential service and people would really be wanting to have more of it rather than less of it. But of course, the reason for the consumption being lowered is also because, people are not able to really get into economic activities. So we are seeing that, the entrepreneurs in the villages haven't been able to carry on with their regular work, etc. So we've done a couple of things where the first thing we've done is to really see how the energy serving companies that have taken debt financing, how can we put a moratorium on the interest that they need to be paying, because obviously the business model is not viable and we don't want them not to be providing energy, which is really a fundamental need of these villages. So that's the first piece. The second piece is we're also trying to see how the consumers can get, a break in terms of paying the regular fee that they need to be paying to the energy serving companies. And the third is, how do you get the entrepreneurs to have access to credit, easy credit in a timely way so that they can get back to their businesses? We've also seen with all the migration that is happening, and my examples are more related to India at this point of time, is that, the rural infrastructure is really not prepared to take care of them, So how do we kind of make energy more available so that that can really become an important backbone for opening up the rural economy, in the medium term and in the long term is really going to be important. We've also brought in some new partnerships, especially on the health side. So, one of your partners, Access Health International, whom we met through AVPN, we brought them in to really see how they can be helping other countries in the region to really respond to COVID-19, because, the experiences in China, the use of technology, how they were addressing testing, opening up the economies are very, very relevant. So we have been, again, through another partner that was introduced to us through AVPN, the International Innovation Corps, which is part of the University of Chicago Trust. They've been working very closely with the Ministry of Health, really advising them on the digital as well as the AI for health piece. And, so they've really been working very closely with the Ministry of Health on one side, trying to understand where is it that, technologies can be scaled up, what are the kind of technologies can be effective, and how through the Access Health partnership that we have, bring that knowledge via the International Innovation Corps back to the Ministry of Health. Similarly, in Thailand, we are hosting a meeting where we have the parliamentarians coming together to really understand, how China was really able to address the Wuhan issue and what does it mean for Thailand, similarly in Myanmar and across the region. So I think that has really been important. At the same time, we are also working very closely with you, where we are trying to really set up the nudge unit within the Niti Aayog, where the behavioral change is so important, and this is something, whether it's social distancing, I mean, there are practicalities in a lot of slums where, across the region, where it's just not possible, and the kind of behavior change which is needed. So I'm very excited about the work that we're doing with your team in India to really see how we can partner with the government to really make better sense of, the kind of behavior changes which are needed. How do we get the global expertise? Because there's a lot out there, but the moment is, how can we be agile and effective to bring it back to really serve the context in India? The last piece that I want to mention is also, we are working with a range of stakeholders right now in India to really see how the testing kits can be manufactured locally. And I think we're still not at a point where we can announce a partnership, but we've been working very closely with the Principal Scientific Advisor, Government of India, and his team to really see how we can really scale up testing, because that is really going to be really, really important for a country like India to be able to address the issue around the pandemic, and also look at how can the economic recovery happen where people can get back to their normal lives. So I think, we are taking very, very tangible steps across different ecosystem actors so that, our interventions don't become ad hoc, but they really become part of, what others are trying to do, because we're just a very small drop in the ocean. And I think, what one is seeing is the power of collaborations. And I think, then I really want to congratulate AVPN, because your members are really coming forward and really helping, different actors, whether it's the livelihood piece, whether it's the health piece, whether it's the data and technology piece, of how do we get like-minded folks, because there's so much need out there. And how do we not duplicate efforts, the work that you guys are doing with the Gates Foundation in UP, how can we all be part of the journey? Because the last thing we need is duplication. Resources are scarce. So, we are kind of really trying to see how we can really be catalysts and be able to bring about scale. And I think bring about the intersectoral integration, because, when you go to a rural villager, he's not thinking about health and economics separately. For him, the reality is, how do I get food to the family? How do I take care of my mother who's kind of has some symptoms of COVID-19? So how do we, in a holistic way, get the right actors together to be able to respond to it, rather than continue in working in silos and saying, now you need to turn to XYZ for this support and another entity for another support.
Thanks, Dipali. Thank you firstly also for the shout out to AVPN. But I couldn't agree with you more. This is something that none of us can do alone. No government, no company, no foundation. And, collaboration, breaking silos, doing cross-sectoral collaborations is something that, the Rockefeller Foundation has believed in for a long time. And I'm amazed to see how you have pivoted in this time of crisis to actually sort of look at expanding your existing programs, to look at support, to look at livelihoods generation, and then, of course, all the work you have done around health and working with policymakers. So thank you for that. Tony, let me shift to you now. How are you thinking about a post-COVID recovery and the role of business in building the resilience of the communities you serve? So what are you thinking in terms of a post-COVID environment?
Well, I think we all recognize that post-COVID, a lot of things will not go back to the way it was, from home working to travel and with this COVID disruption, definitely it has taken an impact on our business. But we took the opportunity to look at what we would like to do to transform our businesses as we go forward. I'll give an example. When one of our hotels in Hong Kong, we had to shut it down because obviously during COVID, it's been the hospitality industry is one of the hardest hit. But we looked at it and then we thought there was a lot of things that we wanted to do in the past that we never got a chance because the hotel is operational. So we're taking this opportunity now to completely transform the hotel into a more environmentally friendly. And before there was a lot of resistance in the old team now, but because everything stopped, we were able to convince some of the old team and the smaller team that from a plastic usage point of view, from installing some of the health and wellness items in the hotel, that we hope to be more climate responsible in the next 12 months after when we decide to reopen. In some of the healthcares in businesses, we're looking at how we can cross businesses from some of our different portfolio companies so that they can work together more efficiently. So I think in travel is a big one. In one of our asset management companies in London, we think that Zoom, now everybody's adopting the technology, obviously will reduce dramatically the amount of travel necessary for everybody globally to reduce carbon footprint. So the way that we're looking at different portfolio companies and how they play a part during the COVID, and then how they can improve in ESG standards around the world. That's what we're looking at. We're taking this opportunity as a wake-up call because definitely we know we cannot continue the way that we had done businesses before.
Thanks, Tony. Absolutely. I don't think business can go as before. And, thank you for sharing how companies in the hospitality space are going to be dealing with the aftermath of the pandemic, where we can see that, travel and hospitality are obviously amongst the most affected in terms of businesses. I am going to continue for a little bit, but if you have any questions in terms of from the delegates, I would encourage you to please type it into the question and answer portal, which is at the bottom of your screen. So I'm happy to take your questions, but please type them into the Q&A portal. Just continuing here, I would like to ask Robin, following up on what you talked about, the sectors that you identified that are definitely we're going to see a growth. Do you see, given the fact that there is going to be some amount of an economic slowdown, is in your opinion, is the impact and social investing sector in peril?
I would say that it is having a knock at the moment, and the knock is not a light one. Whether it's in peril, I don't think something like COVID, which I do believe humanity will be proven triumphant once again, and that the breakthrough in science, in technology, the development of vaccine, the therapies that will be developed, we have already seen very incredible progress in those areas and fields already. So I continue to be optimistic that solution will be found and that humanity will be triumphant. So is it a case, is it parallel? I would say no. Is it taking a knock? I would say yes. Yes, so that would be the first reaction I would have. I think social investing, I mentioned earlier on, I think once you change the behavior of the business leaders, once you change the behavior of the boardroom, whether or not it's an enhancement in the area of social consciousness, whether or not it's a change from profit supremacy to a multi-stakeholder supremacy, a type of journey or transition. And those are the fundamental ideological and cultural changes that is needed for a social impact and social investment to truly have an opportunity to take place. And of course, we face many other type of challenges in the area of social investment as well, not least of which is many of them are not immediately investable. And we need to bring projects that are clearly investable, and we leave it to the commercial banks and the private equity firms to take care of that. And it will be projects that are marginally investable. And this is where you need people that were different kinds of consortium members with different mentalities, but sharing the same conviction to come together so that first loss capital owners and the developmental banks, the foundations and family offices may be prepared to take maybe some form of concessionary returns. Then, sovereign wealth fund, you can come together to actually truly take away the impediments that makes a project uninvestable into marginally investable, into fully investable. I think that journey is the critical one that we will all have to participate in, because unless that is done, then truly the gravitation and the velocity of the capital will not find its way there in a tangible and significant way.
Thanks, Robin. I agree again. I mean, I think it is a knock. It is not sort of a.
It's not a knockout.
And not a knockout, exactly. And we are seeing a changing behavior. And like you said, for social investing or impact investing, I think even in the past, the sustainability of the business model was very important and continues to be so, even more so today. So, completely on the same page as that. I do know that you have to step off in 10 minutes. So I will ask you a question in just give me 2 minutes. I think someone has typed in a question for you. So I will come back to you. But before
Sure.
I do that, on the positive note, can I ask you, Dipali, what do you see as positive outcomes of COVID-19? For example, in terms of tackling climate change or the expanding use of data and technology, some of the positives that you've seen come out of the pandemic.
Thanks, Dana. So definitely, before the pandemic, we were all talking about climate change, but we weren't seeing that moment where, everybody was coming together. So with the pandemic, we've seen how with all of us joining forces, what we're able to do in a very, very short span of time and how effective we can be. So I hope, we are going to use this opportunity to really take stock of what we all need to be doing around climate change issues. And I think, not forget that we shouldn't be waiting for yet another crisis. So I think it's really the opportunity is now, and how do we really meet the moment and get everybody who needs to be part of it together to act is going to be really, really important. So I'm really hoping that, we use this moment to do that. Also, our systems across, whether it's our health systems, whether it's the way we've been working with the poorest and the most marginalized communities, how do we really take stock of really reforming ourselves, and I'm including ourselves into that, because, we've seen with the pandemic that, the civil society space that all of us were not necessarily paying attention and saying, well, whether it was governments, whether it was us, but what we've been able to see with the pandemic is that they're the ones who really are in touch. I don't want to say last mile, but as people like Rohini Nilekani say, the first mile, they really had the trust and the ability to really respond to the frontline communities. So, how do we really help this sector, the civic society space, to be able to now really build their capacities and capabilities. As Robin was also mentioning, the business models are not there. How do we really help this sector to be able to use data and technology to be able to inform decision making and be more adept in how they're doing business, because it can't be business as usual. The new normal is going to be different, and how are all of us going to help that sector, the civil society organization sector, to be able to really deal with what is in stock for us in the future, whether it's the climate change, whether it's future health pandemics, etc., because that would really be a real turning point and the need of the hour. I know Robin has to go, so I'll hand it back. I could go on, Nena, with this, but I just want to be respectful of Robin's time.
Thanks, Dipali.
I'm sorry.
That's absolutely true. So, Robin, there is a follow-on question to your answer. So, can you be more specific about how the knock-on social or impact investors is going to play out? So, do you think many investment firms won't survive this period? Or do you think those investment firms who may be on the verge of moving into impact investment stick with safer, more commercial investment opportunities at this time?
I can't speak for other investment firms. I do have an interest in sustainable investing as well as impact investing. I see impact investing as important for this period of time in the evolution of investing, for the reason that there are specific problems to be handled. Right? So whether or not it's environmentally challenged, whether it is socially challenged, whether it is geographically challenged, or a combination of three, perhaps. So impact investing begins with a problem statement, and you must be very precise in that problem statement, and you'll be able to define how are you going to achieve an impact in solving that problem. In other words, there's a longevity to the problem, and the problem needs continuous application and deployment of capital, and it takes measurements, it takes taxonomy, it takes a serious-minded people that take spreadsheets in calculating the return on investment into the same discipline and rigor into applying to understand the measurements of impact at the same time. So, but over time, my personal aspiration is that why do we have UN SDGs? We have UN SDGs because we see that there is hope for humanity. If there was no hope for humanity, that would be the end, right? So collectively, the UN SDGs and the goals that collectively we aggregate the sum total of all that, that equals to me the humanity. In other words, investment for impact is much better when we invest for humanity, right? So and therefore, there is no reason to say that why are we doing impact investing, right? Because you don't ask yourself, why am I investing for humanity? Because there's a reason for the human race to continue, there's a reason for the climate to continue, there's a way for the earth to continue to spin, and therefore we need air, we need water, we need minerals, and we need all the natural habitat to be restored, and we need social justice, and we need gender equality, and all the rest of that, right? So collectively, that represents investment for humanity. So my personal aspiration is to see the journey of moving from impact investing. I would like to see the day that where impact investing disappear from the vocabulary of investment, and that we'll all do investment because there is no measurement in terms of impact. Everything that we do should be for a good social or environmental or any other impact for that.
All investment should be impact focused rather than just having impact investment, which is such a small slice of investment right now being impact focused.
That's right. Then your concentric circles of your investment begins with a small piece of impact investment, then sustainability investment, then responsible investment, and then, of course, investment for returns.
Absolutely. Thank you, Robin, and thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your contribution.
Thank you very much. If I might be able to take my leave now, I thank you, and I wish everybody have a great time. And I look forward to the real day in the event itself, which I understand now several thousand people have registered already.
Absolutely.
So congratulations, AVPN.
Thank you. Thanks, Robin. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Robin talked about all investment being impact investment, or at least being investing for humanity and impact. So there's another question from the audience. Tony, how do you think that COVID-19 is going to change the nature of impact investing in Asia Pacific? Do you think it's going to change at all?
Well, it's interesting because recently there has been a lot of reports out that during the COVID, impact investments, impact funds have outperformed many of the peer funds. And I think that speaking to a number of private banks, there has been a growing interest during the last 2 months in following up about impact investments, both on the liquid side and illiquid side. So I do think that during this crisis, that people have recognized that impact investments is viable, is possible, and people are trying to allocate more to this space and learning at least of this space. Definitely private banks have been getting a lot more inquiries and trying to fill those answers.
Thank you. That's good to know that there is a lot more interest and a lot more a lot more demand from investors to look at having opportunities to invest with impact in their portfolio. Dipali, there's a question for you. Do you find that post the pandemic, do you feel that often governments have let the burden fall on foundations like the Rockefeller Foundation to plug the gaps that have been left by public and private sectors? So is it that we are looking at philanthropic capital to take on more of the burden?
The way I would look at it, Dana, is a little different. I think all governments are really trying to do their very best to serve the well-being of, their population, and genuinely, I've seen that across the region. I think we are being called upon to help fill in the gaps in a lot of places, and we are more than happy to do that, because I think the issues that we are facing are so humongous. In our case, for example, we have seen that governments have been doing quite a bit of work around access to credit, because the MSME sector across the region is badly affected. So when it comes to ASEAN, we've been requested to see how we can do a quick research around the impact of COVID, the economic impact. And, the ASEAN countries are very, very keen to see what they can start doing immediately. How can they learn from each other? So we are definitely working with our partner, Asia Foundation, to make that a reality ASAP, doing it in the next couple of weeks and releasing the report by the draft report would be ready by end of June. In the case of India, we are coming together with some other foundations to really see how we can provide the first loss guarantee. How can we be working towards an AIF structure? Because you need to be making some tiny steps to get to that place as well. So, there are multiple ways in which, we can use our resources. And I think one of the advantages that we have as Rockefeller Foundation is we use our resources, as I said, as high risk capital. We can, fail fast and learn fast and move on. I think for a lot of other people, they really need to be very, very sure around where they're putting in their resources. Will it really be successful? But for us, we are able and allowed to take those risks. And I think in this moment, agility is really critical. And I think what we are learning, not just us as Rockefeller, but across the foundations, how we need to be much more nimble. Our own grant making processes have been quite onerous, and we talk about bureaucracy, but, our systems have been very bureaucratic over the years. So what we've learned is, how can we very quickly get the money out to our partners? How can we combine our efforts when it comes to due diligence, etc.? So, we are learning a lot. And obviously, we are trying to see how we can become true partners of what the government is trying to do, rather than take off the tangent. And I think the resources we bring are really small, but how can we really catalyze them to address important issues? The testing kits that we're doing. Now that, again, the government has already allocated resources, but, they want us to come in and really get the entire ecosystem actors together to be much more nimble of piloting something in a city like Bangalore, and then how do we scale it to 5 cities or 5 clusters and take it to 10 clusters? So, working much more closely with the government, and, they're really trying to do their best. And each of the actors are really trying to do their best, Nena, in this kind of a situation.
Thank you, Dipali. Thank you so much for your, sharing your valuable insights. And thank you, Tony, as well. I actually have left this panel very positive. I think that, we're all talking about partnerships, we're talking about collaboration, we're talking about catalyzing and scaling social transformation, we're talking about investing for humanity, and we're talking about even sort of like corporates, using this lean period to pivot to, areas where otherwise in a full business cycle, they would have found it very hard to do. Uh, we've only dipped a toe in the water on some of these issues, and there is so much more to discuss. So I hope that all the delegates who have attended this webinar will join us at the AVPN virtual conference from 8th to 12th of June. This is the largest gathering of social investors in Asia, where we are expecting more than 5,000 leaders to participate in live sessions to discuss challenges such as access to education, access to sustainable livelihoods, climate change, gender equality, and of course, impact investing. As Dipali very kindly mentioned, a lot of collaborations and partnerships happen at AVPN. So I hope that all of you will join and connect and collaborate with like-minded individuals. Our team will be in touch with more details, and I want to thank everyone for joining us on this webinar and look forward to seeing you at AVPN 2020. Thank you.